we have right now.
Colleen, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Victor Mercado. We haven't met, but I guess I'm gonna go. We're gonna go.
I'm
right
introducing you,
you,
right? My good friend Victor.
Yes. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, I'm going to get started. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Melina Pereira, and I'm the Caltrans project manager for the San Vicente Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, or CMCP. On behalf of the entire project team, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Shannon Bofa and Carlos Diaz to explain the interpretation options available.
Welcome to the Sandig and Caltrans San Vicente Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan Public Meeting number 2. If you are having any trouble with your connection and need to join the webinar audio by phone, call 669-900-9128. You will be prompted to enter the webinar ID 811-0881-1774. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon and select Spanish as your language. To listen only in Spanish, also click on Mute Original Audio. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, like a cell phone or tablet, please press the ellipsis, then Interpretation, and then choose your language. A copy of the presentation in Spanish has also been added to the chat. Now we'll pass it back to you, Melina.
Thank you, Shannon. And let's give a few minutes to those just joining us to get this information.
Bien, y brevemente, mientras esperamos, se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea. Como pueden ver en pantalla, para hacer uso del servicio, solo desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen sus controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en un celular, tableta, etc., presione primero más o los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el
I
idioma.
think we can just move on to the opening remarks. If we're ready, I would like to introduce Colleen Clementson, the Deputy CEO of Planning, Projects, and Programs at Sandig, and Victor Mercado, the Acting Division Chief Design at Caltrans District 11, to provide some introductory remarks.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Just on behalf of Sandig, I really appreciate the participation from the community members, both the Ramona and Lakeside planning groups. We've had great participation as well from staff members from the city of Poway and the county of San Diego. And one of the things that's really important here is as we work on a big picture transportation plan for the region, it's also important that we look at specific corridor improvements. And that's what this is all about. We're looking at this particular corridor in terms of safety improvements, how it connects the region, and also looking at how we take this opportunity to make that broadband connection that's so important, as the pandemic showed us more than ever that the digital divide really does come to life when you realize that kids can't learn if they don't have access to broadband. And it's also really important in how we use technology for safety. It's super important to Sandig how lovely this particular area is in terms of open space, hiking trails, biking. And so that all has to come into play as we do this planning effort. So I want to again thank you all for being here. Turn it over to our partner agency at Caltrans, Victor Mercado.
Thank you for the introduction, Colleen. Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Victor Mercado. I'm the Caltrans District 11 Acting Division Chief for Design. Thank you for joining us for this public meeting regarding the scoping for the San Vicente Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, or CMCP. First, I want to share with you the role that Caltrans has on our state transportation system, and specifically State Route 67. As the owner and operator of State Route 67, Caltrans is responsible to ensure the safety, the efficient operation, and the maintenance of the highway. Caltrans is responsible for developing and constructing projects that are safe, sustainable, integrated, and efficient. In fact, central to our mission is to provide a safe and reliable transportation network that serves all the people and respects the environment. Next, I want to share with you the role that Caltrans has in the San Vicente CMCP effort. Now, Caltrans staff works hand in hand with Sandig to plan for the future of our transportation system and to align state and federal transportation goals and local objectives in a continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive planning process. Regional transportation plans like Sandig's 2021 Regional Plan and CMCPs are key components of those planning responsibilities that both Caltrans and Sandig share. Now, the San Vicente CMCP is a blueprint for identifying and implementing multimodal projects and services within your communities. Development of a CMCP is an integrated planning process bringing together city and county leadership along with their staff, stakeholders, residents, along with Caltrans and Sandig to develop mobility strategies and programs that support evolving needs for mobility and transportation services. Now, the CMCP process is guided by two state documents. The first document is the California Transportation Plan, or CTP, and the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. The first document, the CTP, is a long-range transportation roadmap for the future of our transportation system. While the second document, the Climate Action Plan, is a framework for aligning state transportation infrastructure investments with state climate, health, and social equity goals. Now, the Climate Action Plan calls for increased investments to support zero emissions, transit, freight and rail, as well as projects that will expand access to active transportation, like walking, biking, and the use of mass transit. All these to promote healthier communities. Now, these two guiding documents that I just mentioned represent a policy shift beyond traditional expansion towards more sustainable, accessible for all, and VMT reducing strategies. Now, the San Vicente Corridor Plan will examine the diverse set of communities and individuals that use the corridor's transportation network and their needs. With your input, this corridor plan will improve all transportation routes and facilities in our community. Now, let me shift gears and tell you what Caltrans has done on SR 67 over the last few years. Again, as the owner-operator of State Route 67, Caltrans has carried out a number of improvements independent of the CMCP effort to address not only safety, but operational and maintenance needs as well. Since 2010, we constructed over 15 projects to maintain and improve State Route 67. This has resulted in a positive trend in the reduction of incidents resulting in major injuries and fatalities. We're also embarking on a few other construction projects that will include pavement and culvert rehabilitation and the construction of broadband infrastructure to help bridge the digital divide to East County residents, just like Colleen just mentioned. Caltrans will continue to invest and carry out these types of projects in parallel with the CMCP effort. State Route 67 is a key element of the state transportation system, and Caltrans, in collaboration with Sandig, will continue to make investments in the highway to improve the quality of life of the people who use the highway. Thank you for being here and providing your feedback, which will help us reach our goal. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex Estrella, who will present the regional plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Colleen. I will actually now provide a quick overview of tonight's meeting. In a moment, we will begin our presentation, which is also being led in Spanish by our interpreter in the Spanish language channel. First, the project team will provide some background on the CMCP, related corridor efforts, and how these plans and projects tie into the federal guidelines, state goals, the regional plan, and local city and county general plans. Next, we will provide an overview of the virtual engagement hub and ways you can stay involved with the CMCP. After that, we will provide an overview of existing conditions within the corridor and conduct our first audience poll. Finally, we'll review key needs identified by our initial analysis and take your feedback via polls as well as question and answer session. We will conclude with a review of next steps. And with that, I will hand it over to Rachel Kennedy to present the regional plan.
Thank you, Melina. And before I jump into the slides, let me just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Rachel Kennedy, and I'm working with Melina as the Sandig lead for this corridor plan. And we're really happy to have all of you with us here tonight. So before we move into the focus of tonight, which is the San Vicente Corridor Plan, I'd like to spend a few minutes to share how it relates to Sandig's 2021 regional plan. So every 4 years, Sandig prepares a regional plan in collaboration with the 18 cities and county of San Diego, as well as our regional, state, and federal partners. And the plan serves as a blueprint for how the region will grow and how people will move around out to the year 2050. The current regional plan was adopted by the Sandig Board of Directors in December of 2021. And this plan used a data-driven approach to identify transportation projects and programs to help people access jobs, education, and services. And Sandig is required to update the regional plan every 4 years, and the transportation projects that are included in it must meet federal air quality standards and state requirements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled by the year 2035. So if we move to the next slide, the regional plan considers the unique needs of the rural corridors and identified strategies to provide access and connectivity to rural communities and tribal nations, and to improve safety and operations. Improvements along State Route 67 and other rural corridors include application of strategies focused on reducing the number of vehicle accidents and addressing corridor safety, as well as tactics that increase corridor capacity during emergency evacuations. And this could be done through the use of technology solutions coupled with site improvements such as shoulder widenings, realigning curves for safety, and providing intersection improvements. In complement to the regional plan, a number of near-term projects are being implemented on State Route 67, as you heard about a little bit in Victor's opening remarks. And these include the State Route 67 pavement rehabilitation and fiber communications project, the Ramona Clean California project, and also the State Route 67 culvert rehabilitation project. And these are all projects that are planned for the near term. Now I'd like to provide some more information about the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans, which serve as one of the early steps in implementing the regional plan. On the next slide here, you'll see a graphic that shows that there are a number of policies that feed into the CMCP process. Federal guidelines, state goals, and you heard a little bit about some of those state plans in Victor's remarks, the regional plan, and local and city and county general plans. The corridor plans consider all of these existing plans, as well as demographic, travel, and other data to develop multimodal transportation projects and programs to serve the needs of people in the study area. The corridor plan will be a comprehensive vision for this part of the region and provides a blueprint for future transportation investment decisions in the corridor. Moving on to the next slide here, this explains a little bit about what are the CMCPs? What are these corridor plans? So back in September of 2019, the Sandig Board of Directors allocated funds to develop 11 corridor plans throughout the region. And these corridor plans build upon the regional plan and take a more detailed look at the transportation in these selected areas of the region. 5 of these corridor plans are currently being developed as a joint effort between Caltrans and Sandig. And you can see them depicted here on the map. And the focus of our meeting tonight, the San Vicente Corridor, which is shown in orange along the eastern portion of the map and includes State Route 67 and the surrounding community. And these corridor plans will be looking at all transportation modes: highways, local roads, transit services, biking, walking, equestrian paths, flexible fleets, goods movement, and the technologies that are needed to make them work smoothly together. And these corridor plans are very helpful for Sandig and important in us competing to bring transportation funds to the region. And they're required for us to be able to compete for some of the Senate Bill 1 transportation funds. And both Caltrans and Sandig are always looking for opportunities to bring more funds to our region to help implement the projects. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Melina to now share information about the San Vicente Corridor.
Thank you, Rachel. So as a brief orientation to the corridor, this slide presents the study area and the area of influence for the plan. The study area, represented by the slightly darker color on the map, is the focus of our proposed transportation solutions, and the draft project inventory we are presenting today will fall within this area. The surrounding lighter color on the map is the area of influence and represents the area that will likely be impacted by the proposed improvements. Next slide. So as we discussed in the first public meeting, the CMCP project team has broken down the corridor into geographical segments, which are shown on the screen for your reference. Each segment represents a different portion of the corridor with its own unique characteristics. Next slide. The CMCP is being developed in parallel to several other ongoing efforts to improve the San Vicente Corridor. So the PA and ED project will focus most heavily on enhancing operations and will improve the safe and efficient movement of people and goods using various modes of travel during both typical highway operations and emergencies such as wildfires. Project objectives also include encouraging active transportation, providing multimodal options such as bike paths and/or lanes where feasible, facilitating recreational and wildlife movement along and across the route, and preserving the human and natural environment along 67. This PA&ED effort will help advance the San Vicente CMCP high-level concepts within the PA&ED project limits to the feasibility phase, design, and implementation in the short term. This will help the corridor compete for transportation project funding in the San Diego region. So the SR67 fiber communications and pavement rehabilitation project proposes to repair and improve the overall ride quality on 18.4 miles of travelway and shoulders on 67, from just north of San Diego River Bridge in Lakeside to State Route 78 and 10th Street in Ramona. The California Transportation Commission has approved the installation of broadband capabilities as part of this project, which will be done simultaneously with the repaving, which will help expand affordable broadband for residents. The project is scheduled to begin construction in spring of 2022 and complete construction in fall of 2023, with the total capital cost of $39 million. The next one is the Coast Canyons and Trails CMCP. And this study area includes SR 52 and portions of 67. It overlaps at the southernmost point of the San Vicente CMCP, and we are coordinating with that corridor team, especially where the two CMCPs overlap. And with that, I'll now hand it over to Shannon for our first participant check-in.
So at this point, we want to remind you all that if you have any questions about the material we've covered so far, you can submit your questions in the chat or using the Q&A feature at any time during this meeting. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Before we get started with our audience polling and Q&A discussion, it's important to provide some ground rules. The question and answer segment will be held after the presentation, but again, you can submit your comments at any time. Questions will be addressed by the facilitator and answered by the panelist team. Please submit your questions one at a time in the Q&A option. Please be respectful. Inappropriate language will not be permitted. Disruptive participants will be removed from the webinar. If you are having a technical problem, please send a message via the webinar chat box. Those calling in, press *9 to raise and *9 to lower their hand. To reach us anytime after this webinar, please email or call cmcp@sandag.org or call the CMCP hotline at 888-317-8976 or text the CMCP text hotline at 844-569-0570. So now we're going to do our first audience check-in, and you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. Please select the answer that applies to you. The question is, how did you learn about this meeting? Was it Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, a community calendar, online or print advertising, an email invite, a flyer posted at a community site? Are you a member of a local community group, or did somebody tell you about it? The next question is, are you attending alone or are others with you? The first option is I am alone. The second option is I am with one other person. The third option is I am with 2 other people. The fourth option is I am with 3 other people. And the fifth option is I am with a large group of people, 4 or more. Our third question is, where do you live? Lakeside, Poway, Recreation Ridge or Wine Country, Ramona, Tribal Lands, El Cajon, Santee, or East County, east of Ramona, or outside of the study area. And be sure to scroll down to see questions 2 and 3. Thank you to everyone who has submitted their answers already. We'll give you about 30 more seconds to get those answers in. All right, thanks everyone for submitting your answers.
All right, I think we'll move on to the CMCP development process. So I'm Amy Jackson. I'm the project manager from the consultant side, and I'll be talking through the process, the needs assessment, and the project inventory. So to begin, this slide provides an overview of where we are in the CMCP process. The first area on the left shows where we were when we last saw you. We were developing the needs assessment along with our stakeholder working group, our subject matter experts, and as well as our baseline conditions analysis results. All of that feedback led to our needs assessment. Since then, the project team has developed what we call the universe of projects, or our wish list of projects. A lot of that has come from public feedback via the public meeting or the virtual engagement hub. Those survey comments, and then also some of the existing plans that are already out there for planned projects. The project team and subject matter experts have also contributed to that wish list, and all of that led to the draft project inventory. So the next phase that we're in right now is presenting that draft project inventory to our stakeholder working group, our community planning groups, and you all as members of the public to provide feedback to us and make sure that that list of projects is comprehensive and meets the needs of everyone, all the users on the corridor. And that feedback will help us develop the final project inventory. And from there, the next steps will be focusing on evaluating that project inventory based on our performance measures, coming up with cost estimates, and then also bundling some of the projects together to get them grant ready. And that will be the final list of CMCP projects. And I just wanted to make a side note to the virtual engagement hub that I just mentioned. Here you have a QR code on the screen. We are keeping that virtual engagement hub open until March 23rd. So you still have time for about 4 more weeks now to go onto that website. It's very user-friendly. It has instructions for how to use it, and you can pinpoint comments for projects that you are interested in seeing. So let's dive into the needs assessment. As I mentioned, we compiled the input that we received from all of the stakeholder groups and developed this list of 7 final needs. So we have active transportation, evacuation, information and technology, goods movement, and this is a new one since we last saw you, safety, which is really our #1 priority for the corridor, and traffic congestion is also new since the last time we saw you, and lastly, we have utilities. And I should mention that this is not an all-encompassing list. There are other ideas, themes, and goals that were considered and interwoven throughout the project's list, such as, the community connections in Lakeside and creating Main Street feel in Ramona, increasing equitable access to transportation. All of that, those are really themes that we incorporated into the project's list versus these are the 7 needs for the corridor. And then I'll also mention that all of these needs are very integrated with each other. Each project doesn't necessarily just address one need, although when we go through the project inventory, you will see them identified as addressing one need. That doesn't necessarily mean that they only address that need. That was just choosing a primary need category for the sake of that the inventory. So for example, an active transportation project typically will inherently increase safety for the vulnerable users, but we put it in the active transportation project inventory list. And then, many of the utilities projects also enhance information accessibility. There's a ton of overlap between all of these needs. And these needs were the guide for developing the transportation solutions that we'll be covering for the remainder of the presentation today. So starting with active transportation includes biking, people who bike, people who walk, and people who ride horses. So based on our needs assessment, we've identified that There are inadequate facilities today. Bikes have to share high-speed roadways. Pedestrians have to cross long distances. There's gaps in the sidewalk network. And we've also heard that the planned projects for the corridor may also not meet the community's expectations for adequate facilities. So our list of projects are here to address those needs. We found that 92% of people traveling on the corridor use their vehicle, and 7% walk, 1% bike. And as mentioned, with the inadequate facilities, this is a very understandable mode share distribution. Walking and biking on the corridor can seem very treacherous, and the projects that we'll show today are hoping to change that. We also know that there are over 10,000 horses in the corridor that we want to account for, and that equestrian is a very popular activity in the study area. So when creating the active transportation project list, we're looking to create a protected trunk line for vulnerable users along SR 67, and then branch that trunk line off to create lower stress connections to key destinations and provide access into the neighborhoods and adjacent communities. So before I show the project inventory map, just wanted to cover again the different types of facilities that you'll see, especially for bikes, because this is terminology that some of us are used to and some of us may not be. So class 1 facility is a bike path or a multi-use path. And these are separate from the roadway, so they're not within the roadway width. And they can be either bikes only, or they can be shared between bikes and pedestrians, or they can be shared between equestrian and pedestrian. And we've understood from the community that sharing facilities between bike and equestrian is not ideal. It can scare the horses. So that is definitely something that we've heard and we are incorporating. Then we have class 2 buffered bike lanes. These are in road and they have a horizontal separation with a buffer between the bike lane and the vehicle lane. And then lastly, we have class 4, which is a protected bikeway. You may have heard the term cycle track as well. It can be one way or it can be two way. And that is basically an enhancement from class 2. So not only does it have the horizontal separation between bike and vehicle, but it also has an element of vertical protection, like you can see here in the image. So here we have we're breaking it down by bike, then pedestrian, and then equestrian. In the report, we have all of these together, but for ease of explaining it, we're breaking it out so you can see it a little bit more easily. So as I mentioned, we really want to focus on that trunk line for bikes and pedestrians. So we're proposing a multi-use path on 67 from Lakeside to the Highland and Dye intersection. And that transitions to a class 4 facility approaching Ramona. And then it transitions again to class 2 bike lanes on Main Street where the speeds are a little bit lower. So then we've blown up here in the inset Lakeside. And so you can see it a little bit bigger. Major connections from 67 include Mapleview Street, and that provides connections to the east of 67, and then Lakeside Avenue and Riverside Drive. We have the class 4 facility with further connections to the west. And then we have connections from those connections further into the community along Moreno Avenue, Willow Road, and then through the Eucalyptus Hills area along Valle Vista Road and Oak Creek Drive. And then in Poway, we have two, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. I meant to blow that up for you all. Oh gosh, okay, sorry, going back. I'm gonna zoom out and stay there. So then along the Poway section, and it looks like we have a little mistake here on this slide, and I apologize, you can barely see it, but on the Poway section, we have class 4 bikeways or bikeways proposed on Poway Road. And then we have, all right, real live time fix there. So we have class 4 bikeways on Poway Road. We know that there's high speed, sharp curves with low visibility there. And we know that this would require some widening, but we also know that it's a very popular desire line for bicyclists that we'd like to see properly resolved with adequate facilities. And then we have a class 1 path on Scripps Poway Parkway, we know that speeds are extremely high, and only the shoulder is available to people biking today. So we want to provide a more dedicated space for those riders. And then in Ramona, aside from the 67 itself, we're proposing 2 parallel routes for a more comfortable ride for all, to incorporate all ages and abilities. So one along the north with La Brea Street and B Street, and then one along the south with Raymond Avenue and D Street. So both of these would require a new connection between those roads that would only be accessible via non-motorized users. And this prevents vehicles from being able to use that as a cut through to avoid congestion on Main Street. And it provides just another option for people that want to feel more comfortable not being on Main Street. Then we have some class 4 bikeways on the higher speed roadways such as 60 or 78 and Ramona Street, and then a series of class 2 connections, making sure that we're providing everyone access to all parks, trailheads, and schools. So next we have pedestrian improvements. And before we show you the map, just a couple of things again that you'll see are pedestrian intersection improvements. And that can include anything from, here's just a couple examples, pedestrian actuated signals where the pedestrian would actually push the button in order for the signal to turn on. And we have enhanced crosswalks. So here you can see ADA compliant curb ramps, high visibility crosswalks. And this one in particular is actually raised. And then we have a lead pedestrian interval that could also be an option. And what that does is it allows the pedestrian to actually enter the crosswalk and be visible to a vehicle before the vehicle gets the green light to be able to go. And that prevents that right turning conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. So the multi-use path that we mentioned in the bike improvement maps, those are also are intended for pedestrians as well. And then the equestrian trails that we'll show in the next slide will also be able to be assumed to be able to be used by pedestrians. But other than those facilities, we are showing some of the pedestrian specific projects. So for Lakeside, we're proposing sidewalk enhancements on Mapleview Street, traffic calming on Willow Road, and intersection enhancements at various major intersections on that segment. And then in Ramona, we have sidewalk enhancements on Archie Moore Road for the safer connections to parks and schools. We have traffic calming on Main Street to create more of a downtown atmosphere that encourages walking. We have pedestrian enhancements on Ramona Street and Hanson Lane for access to the high school. And then we also have, again, intersection enhancements at various major intersections, some of which are already being taken care of as part of the Clean California project. For equestrians, we've identified a couple of key connections in the study area based on the Ramona and Lakeside Trails Master Plan that we felt were important connections for this corridor as a whole by providing connections in this study area. And those include along the east side of Moreno Avenue and Vigilante Road, along San Vicente Avenue, crossing SR 67, along the area that's south of Willow Road, providing that connection to Vine Street. Another one under Scripps Poway Parkway and across 67, connecting Poway to the reservoir area and that all those recreational destinations. And then lastly, a connection between Northern Poway and Ramona via Highland Valley Road and a route just north of Main Street. These trails are assumed to be soft surface trails, so we anticipate that they could double as pedestrian space and potentially also accommodate wildlife crossings. And as I mentioned, we've heard about horses not being able to share space with bicyclists, so we've identified where we can separate facilities for each of those two users. But at a minimum, if they were to be together, they would have they would be separated by at a minimum a landscape strip.
All right, time for audience check-in number 2. So the question is, how responsive are these projects to the active transportation needs in the San Vicente corridor on a scale of 1 to 5? And then scroll down for the next question, which is, which of the following projects interest you the most? Multi-use path along SR 67 from Lakeside to Ramona. Soft surface equestrian trail between Ramona and Poway. Traffic calming improvements in Ramona and Lakeside. Comfortable bikeway paths and trails parallel to the San Vicente corridor, or other. And if you choose other, feel free to add your input to the chat. And just to clarify there on question number 1, for the scale of 1 to 5, 1 is being not responsive and 5 is being very responsive.
So I'm seeing a good amount of participation. For those who are choosing 1 as not responsive, please feel free to type some things in the chat if you have suggestions, or I also encourage you to use Social Pinpoint to provide suggestions if you feel that there are other projects out there that would be more helpful. And it looks like a lot of people are really supportive of traffic calming improvements in Lakeside and Ramona, which is awesome. And then those that are choosing other, again, similar, feel free to put in the chat some of the ideas that you have or use Social Pinpoint. Okay, I think we'll keep going. So moving on to evacuation, we know that the Cedar Fire in 2003 and the Witch Creek Fire in 2007 were 2 major evacuation events in the area, and that residents and visitors alike experienced really lengthy evacuation times during those events. Therefore, evacuation operations improvements are a major priority for this CMCP. The evacuation area that's shown in blue on this screen, which includes Ramona Planning Area and the Verona Reservation, is home to over 30,000 residents, and the majority of those residents would use 67 to evacuate. As part of the PA&ED project, a model was run for the evacuation study area to determine the evacuation capacity needed on 67 to clear the area. And this study is still in draft form right now, but the outcome will help define the alternatives that the project will study. And I should note that the results of that outcome and alternatives that are chosen, the evacuation lanes that are needed do not directly equate to a travel lane in particular. An evacuation lane can be a travel lane, but it can also be a wide shoulder or even a bikeway facility. So these are some of the corridor-wide recommendations that are identified in the CMCP, and those include evacuation alerts and sirens to help convey information in a timely manner, especially to those that do not have access to cell phones, internet, or broadband, which we know is a major concern along this corridor. And then evacuation route signing along the corridor. An evacuation meeting point has been identified at the Iron Mountain Trailhead. And we're proposing evacuation event tow truck deployment at key locations along the corridor, including 10th Street, Poway Road, Scripps Poway Parkway, and Willow Road. And that will help remove broken down vehicles during an evacuation more quickly. Variable message signing and dynamic message signing will be able to provide key customized messaging to the drivers during an event. And then during a non-evacuation event, these could be used to serve other purposes like safety campaigns. And then other corridor-wide projects shown that are not shown in the photos here include reversible lane management systems to help people evacuate and get them out of harm's way during major disasters. An active traffic and demand management system to assist with alternative routing and deploy alternate signal timings during emergency, and emergency communication system to allow for push notifications to residents and visitors during the emergency event or scheduled power shutoff. So here you have, I'm so sorry for this tickle in my throat. The main project here that is showing on this evacuation project inventory is showing the extents of the PAED project itself. So that's from Lakeside and to Highland Dye intersection. And what we're indicating here is that the CMCP will basically support the recommended alternative that comes out of that PAED alternatives analysis. In addition to that, and the corridor-wide projects that were listed on this previous slide, we're also showing here the locations of those tow truck deployments and evacuation staging area. We're also recommending parking removal near the major trailheads for ease of evacuation operations, and recommended fire access roads along Mina de Oro and Foster Truck Trail for easier access for emergency responders. And I'll just leave this slide up here for just another minute before we go to, or another couple of seconds before we go to the questions for evacuation.
All right, our next question is, how responsive are these projects to the evacuation needs in the San Vicente Corridor? On a scale of 1 to 5, again, 1 being not very responsive and 5 being very responsive. And then question number 2, have you been involved in an evacuation event on the corridor? The options are, yes, I've had to evacuate at my home. Yes, I was on SR 67 during an evacuation. Yes, I knew people who had to evacuate. Yes, I've been a first responder during an event on the corridor, or no.
So with the answers coming in, it does look like a lot of people have either had to evacuate their home or were on the 67 or somehow involved in the past evacuations. And that is the reason for heavy interest on this topic specifically. Looks like a lot of people feel that these projects do address the needs. A couple people are giving low scores, and again, encourage you to provide that feedback. Give it another 10 seconds. All right, moving along. So goods movement is a light category here because we combine it with traffic congestion and really as a need together. These are they serve the same purpose. You know, when we're addressing traffic congestion, we are also assisting in goods movement. So the The San Vicente Corridor transports agricultural goods, aggregate, wine, livestock, and equestrian supplies. We also know that special events like rodeos draw significant truck traffic to the corridor, and specifically trucks make up an average of 7% of the total vehicles on 67. We know that 67 is a lifeline corridor for East County communities and tribal communities. And we've also noted that the corridor is characterized by sharp curves, potholes, rough surfaces, all of which can damage or disturb the fragile commodities that that are listed above. So many of the traffic congestion projects that you'll see later are also will be shown together as a combined traffic congestions and goods movement need in the report. But we pulled out two specific project types that specifically address goods movement, which are truck climbing and passing lanes specifically located in Recreation Ridge along that segment, and then along Wildcat Canyon Road near the high school. And then we're also proposing a couple of truck runaway ramps in Recreation Ridge and the climb segments where we have steep grades. And this is another example of how projects can address multiple needs as this addresses safety issues and goods movement concerns. So we'll keep moving on to safety. As we mentioned earlier, safety is the highest priority for the 67 CMCP. We know that 38% of all collisions were attributed to unsafe speeds. So this is a huge percentage. It tells us that speeding is a major issue on this corridor. The most common types of collisions were rear end and hit object, both of which can be a result of vehicles speeding. Collisions along the San Vicente Corridor have consistently occurred at signalized intersections, sharp curves, and the urbanized portions of the corridor, such as Lakeside and Ramona segments. These crash patterns can be attributed to the rural nature of the corridor with high speeds, intermittent traffic controls, variable grades, and frequent sharp curves. And lastly, we also know that the corridor bisects several different wildlife habitats and creates a man-made barrier between the wildlife travel patterns, reducing the wildlife biodiversity. So this is a safety hazard for both wildlife and motorists, and something that we're looking to address here today too. A couple of examples of safety treatments. We can see the roadway safety edge here that is dangerous if a wheel starts to run off the side of the road. We have an example here of falling rock protection devices that we're proposing, a center left turn lane that basically removes the left turns from the through travel lane and allows the through traffic to keep moving and minimizes that conflict point. We have curve warning signs and many other curve warning or curve treatments that are proposed for the various sharp curves on the corridor, and then high friction surface road treatments. We also are proposing a road reallocation of Main Street in downtown Ramona. So you can see here, and this is by no means definitive of what the road will look like, but you can take 4 lanes of traffic and reduce it down to 2 or 3. That helps reduce crossing distances for vulnerable users. It helps slow speeds, and it helps provide space for all users on the corridor. We have a gateway sign proposed for certain areas on the corridor, and this is just an example of what that can look like. And that really just gives the drivers this sense of arrival into a downtown area, hoping to slow speeds, make them aware of the presence of vulnerable users, and really make them feel like they are no longer the priority as arrival as they arrive into that area. And then the right side here, you have 2 examples of what wildlife crossings could look like using culverts and underpasses. So while safety was considered in the development of all of the projects in this inventory, this suite of projects identified are directly focused on addressing a specific safety issue. Since we know that speeding is an issue on the corridor, we've identified a couple of areas that could benefit from traffic calming measures. Examples would be Willow Road, Poway Road, and Main Street in Ramona, as well as 2 of those locations that we've identified for speed studies to potentially reduce this posted speed limit. There's also an area along the Poway segment where a center left turn lane would be helpful for preventing future head-on collisions. And we've identified sharp curve areas where curve safety treatments would be beneficial. We've identified a series of intersections that could benefit from safety treatments, such as smaller radii on the curves or on the corners, shorter crossing distances for pedestrians, and better sight distance visibility. And then lastly, we're showing here on the map locations where a previous San Diego State University wildlife movement study identified locations for wildlife crossings. And then in addition to these spot improvement locations, we've also identified corridor-wide safety improvements in the CMCP, and that includes increased wayfinding, especially along Poway, Recreation Ridge, and Wine Country segments where there's a lot of destinations for visitors to go, and confused drivers can create opportunities for collision. So providing that additional wayfinding gives them the opportunity to navigate to their destination more safely. We've also recommending smart parking systems at trailheads so that visitors can plan ahead of their trip rather than arriving, seeing that there's no parking available, and then going out onto the corridor and searching for parking there. We've recommended improved vegetation management strategies to increase driver visibility. DMS signs, as we mentioned earlier, that can help with safety campaign messaging, design improvements for safe recovery areas, and also an evaluation of existing guardrail improvement needs and gap closures. So we'll open up another set of 2 polling questions about safety.
So for this question, how responsive are these projects to the safety needs in the San Vicente Corridor on a scale of 1 to 5? Again, 1 being not very responsive and 5 being very responsive. And then if you scroll down to question 2, which segment are you most concerned about for safety reasons? Lakeside, the Climb, Poway, Recreation Ridge, Wine Country, or Ramona?
Right, the responses are very well spread out along the different segments of the corridor. I think we're all in agreement that there's a lot of safety issues along the whole corridor, so it's hard to pick just one segment to focus on, and they all could use improvements. And getting a lot of good feedback about this being responsive to the safety needs. So thank you all for your input. We'll keep things moving. And let's go to traffic congestion. So the corridor is heavily utilized for both commuting and recreational purposes. So therefore, this corridor is unique in the fact that its traffic congestion can be an issue on both weekdays and weekends. Specific congestion issues are identified for Recreation Ridge, specifically as a result of Ramona commute patterns to and from work in Poway. And for the goals for addressing traffic congestion issues, this approach was really 2-pronged. So we want to, number 1, address key congestion issues that are out there today, but we also want to increase accessibility to alternative modes of transportation. So you can see here in the data that 81% of trips are vehicle trips, and 20% of households have 0 or 1 car per household. And we call that transportation vulnerable, meaning this leaves them, for the reasons that we mentioned earlier, which is, there's a lack of transit and fixed service transit. And then there's also inadequate active transportation facilities. So not only are those people, that 20% transportation vulnerable, but also the other 80% of people are not really incentivized to use anything other than their vehicle. So we really want to focus on both of those, addressing congestion, but also providing alternative mode options. So some of the things that you'll hear in the next slide on the map, just wanted to give a visual of what those look like. You can see a frontage road here, and that basically is a road on the side of the main highway that consolidates the different driveways and allows a different route. It basically minimizes the number of conflict points and access points along a major roadway. We also have some neighborhood shuttles recommended, and this is just an example of a vehicle, what the vehicle could look like. And then we also have truck climbing lanes recommended, which really just pulls the trucks off to the side and allows passenger vehicles to get up an uphill grade more quickly. So for addressing that first prong of our goals approach, which is addressing key bottlenecks, we're proposing intersection control evaluations at various intersections. And that could mean performing a signal warrant analysis at a currently unsignalized intersection, or it could mean evaluating alternative designs for an existing signalized intersection. We also have wayfinding signage, which I mentioned earlier, which during the safety section, which also helps with traffic congestion by allowing more people to easily navigate to their desired destination. There are a couple of turnout viewpoint areas that would avoid people rubbernecking while driving along this beautiful corridor, giving them a place to pull over and take in the view. And we've also paired these places with bike fix-it stations and callback box locations, just combining those different projects together in one combined space. And then, as I mentioned, frontage roads, we're proposing that one along wine country segment where there's a lot of driveways on the north side of that segment, and you know, having all the residents come out of different driveways prevents a safety issue and also a traffic congestion issue. So this frontage road would basically consolidate all of those driveways and put them into and just space out the access a little bit further. And then there's also not really a frontage road, but more so a new roadway connection in the Recreation Ridge segment that will allow direct access from 67 over to the Dos Picos County Park in those recreational areas without everyone having to go up and all the way around the corridor. And lastly, we have smart intersection systems, which will provide vehicle communication capabilities and signal timing coordination, as well as transit priority capabilities. So then for that second prong, increasing alternative modes, we have a new fixed route service proposed that will connect Ramona and Poway via Scripps Poway Parkway that will serve the major employment centers and local destinations. We have a community connector route, which is a flexible fleet service providing pickup and drop-off transportation in the designated zones of Ramona and Lakeside. And then a neighborhood shuttle proposed for connecting key destinations within Lakeside and for connecting key destinations along Ramona and the wine country segments. And lastly, a rideshare program that would serve the study area communities to access the Barona Resort and Casino and other key destinations in Lakeside and Ramona. So I'll send it to our traffic congestion poll.
So given that information that Amy just shared, how responsive are these projects to the traffic congestion needs in the San Vicente corridor? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very responsive and 5 being very responsive. And then be sure to scroll down to question number 2. Which of the following projects interest you most? New fixed service transit route between Ramona and Poway, flexible fleet and shuttle services, new truck climbing lane along Recreation Ridge, new turnouts and viewpoints, intersection control evaluations, wayfinding signage along Recreation Ridge and Wine Country, or other.
Okay, the results are showing that I think most people are interested in the intersection control evaluations. And runners up would be wayfinding signage, flexible fleet and shuttle service, and new fixed service transit route. Awesome. Thank you all for your feedback. And we will go on to our last one, I think, 2 more. So utilities. So based on Sandig's regional digital equity strategy and action plan that was recently released, we know that 66% of rural communities in San Diego County have access to fixed broadband. You can also see that the statistics on internet subscription by income level here. And so we know that getting access to internet and broadband is a big deal for these corridor communities. Based on the needs assessment, several tribal communities in the eastern part of the area of influence lack broadband access. And as the region transitions to more electric passenger vehicle trucks and buses, high-speed chargers will be needed along this critical people and goods movement corridor. So expanding digital infrastructure along the corridor will enable the deployment of several transportation technology solutions to support evacuation management and many of the other needs discussed today. And we also know that power shutoffs due to wildfire danger impact the traffic signals on 67, as well as the critical communications equipment. Here we're just showing a couple of example pictures of EV charging. And if you're interested in seeing what fiber communications look like before they go in the ground, we have that there. So here this is a simple looking map, but it's a big deal. Providing broadband service would require partnership with a broadband provider and other entities. So the following 2 projects that are shown here on the lines will incorporate conduit sharing or joint use trenching that will provide the infrastructure for future development of broadband, which will help reduce vehicle miles traveled by being able to implement transportation demand management strategies such as teleworking. And many other transportation demand managements and many other benefits to this broadband access. So the first one is the ongoing microtrenching project, fiber communications project that Melina had talked about earlier in the presentation along 67 between the San Diego River Bridge and Highland Valley Die intersection that will add fiber optic telecommunication infrastructure to serve the communities east of the SR 67 study area. And then the CMCP itself is also proposing to extend that utilities infrastructure work from the Highland Die Road intersection through the city of Ramona to provide conduit infrastructure for future broadband service as well. And then we are also showing on this map the locations for existing EV chargers and also where we are proposing either expanding those existing chargers or proposing new ones. So I know this is not a lot of looking projects, but they are very dense projects and very important projects. So I'm just sitting here for another 10 seconds just to let you take it in before we go to our poll for utilities. All right.
All right, so how responsive are these projects to the utilities needs in the San Vicente Corridor? Scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very responsive, 5 being very responsive. And then if you'll scroll down to question number 2, which of the following projects are most needed along the San Vicente corridor? EV charging stations, broadband accessibility, power backup sources, fiber optic telecommunications, or other.
And I just wanted to mention that I did forget to identify power backup sources as a recommended project for the corridor. You can see it in the second poll as one that is recommended in the CMCP, but I did forget to mention it. Apologies. So we're getting good feedback here. Seems like everyone is very interested in the power backup sources, so apologies for missing that. Okay. So moving on to the last one, try to rush through this because I know we're running out of time. We want to leave time for question and answers, but information technology is the last need category, and it's really a supporting need. So you've probably already heard a lot of these projects incorporated into the other needs, but we've just listed here a couple of ways that information and technology can support those other 6 needs that we've discussed today. So for active transportation, wayfinding CMS messages to support safety for vulnerable users. For evacuation, we've got push notifications, emergency sirens, messaging signs. For goods movement, we've got corridor-wide monitoring system to identify the congestion issues. For safety, we have a fiber backbone to support things like adaptive signal timing, backup power for emergencies, and scheduled shutoffs. And lastly, for traffic congestion, we have updated signalized intersections, or upgraded, sorry. So I know I rushed through that. This will be provided later for you to look through, but on most of these have been already discussed in the other needs. Okay, passing it back to Melina.
Thank you, Amy. So if we can move on to the next slide.
So we can jump into the Q&A section now if everyone's ready.
Sure.
All right, so our first question, which I think we're going to pass to Victor, is will SR 67 line striping be updated to adhere to the highway design manual, specifically updating turn lanes to the residential neighborhoods?
Okay,
Victor?
I'll take that. And that question came from Joelle, right? Joelle, thank you for your question, and actually, and also thank you for attending. And I'll go ahead and take your question. Just briefly as a background, so all projects that Caltrans construct are prepared following the current design standards and including the highway design manual. And also, whenever we do reconstruction on a given area, we're also required to bring up the current standards features like striping, like what you're mentioning. Now, with regards to your specific questions about turning lanes into driveways, that may not always be a design standard. Usually, in order for us to install or provide a turning lane, there has to be a given number of vehicles making that turn. I'm happy to, if you have a specific location that you're talking about, I'm happy to take a note of it and look into it. But I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Victor. Our next question says, thank you for holding this webinar. How will the project address the ongoing issue of crossover collisions as most of the corridor does not have a solid center divide? I think we're going to pass that question along to Erwin.
Hi, good evening. And the question is from Robin Joy Maxon. This is Erwin Gawanko, and yes. So as far as this project, it isn't specifically addressed, isn't specifically to address that particular issue. We do have here at Caltrans a monitoring program for crossover collisions. And whenever there are collisions that occur, it flags out on our system. And we did have issues that crossover collisions that did occur, and we've addressed it in the past. So back in 2018, I think we had a project that was initiated and finally implemented with 12 miles stretch of having 5,400 flexible channelizers on the median. And I know the question is about having a solid center divide, but that project, as a result of the crossover collisions, after it had been implemented, it pretty much eliminated the fatalities that occurred along that stretch. So there isn't any plan at this time to put in a solid center divide. I think there were issues when it was previously addressed with the channelizers, and the channelizers had seemed to perform, and we're continuing to monitor this, and any of the crossover collisions that occur, it'll flag out on our system, and we will definitely be addressing those. But for that stretch of 12 miles, the flexible channelizers have been very, very effective. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Erwin. Our next question is, what is the speed limit on Main Street where a class 2 is being proposed? And I think Amy is going to cover this one.
Yeah, so the speed limit now is 35 miles per hour. And I don't know if the question was like kind of indicating why aren't we proposing class 4, but we went with class 2 for a couple of reasons. One is there's a lot of driveways, and so class 4s with a lot of driveways don't always mix well. It basically creates sometimes more conflict than it resolves at the intersections and driveways. And also we're proposing to, with the road diet and some other traffic calming measures, we anticipate that the speed will go down, the 85th percentile speed, potentially an opportunity for reducing the speed limit. And so class 2 with a wide enough buffer we felt was an adequate facility for Main Street.
Thanks, Amy. The next question says, the term multi-use path is confusing. The county's trails program, multi-use trails, are soft surface to include the 3 user groups: pedestrians, equestrians, and mountain bikes. Does a multi-use path include equestrians? The county's, we can hear you. The county's program includes pathways, which are soft surface for all 3 users located in the outer edge of a public road easement. And I think Amy is going to take this one too.
I think I can take the first part of it. I'm a little confused by the second part, but maybe we can get back to the person with this question afterwards. But multi-use path, what we've proposed means pedestrian and bicycle. So where we are proposing equestrian use is those specific green lines that you'll see on the map at the couple locations. Otherwise, we intended multi-use path to mean bikes and pedestrians. And then the county using pathways for soft surface, I'm not exactly sure about the definition of the pathway. I would have to get back to you on that one, or get back to Mary Ann on that one, unless anyone else on the team has input there. Okay, we'll save that one as a follow-up.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So our next question is SDG&E working with this project group to ensure adequate electricity availability during high wind events that lead to power shutoffs that can last for 3 days? With more electric vehicles, we will have people stuck without any form of transportation during an evacuation event. So Amy, if you want to address this one.
Sure. So there are parallel corridor efforts like the PNE, A&ED that are working with SD and G&E for these types of efforts. The CMCP is not specifically. We are specifically recommending, the power backups that I was discussing at the end with utilities in order to make sure that that the signals are still operating and everything's still operating during those forced power shutoffs. As far as the electric vehicles, if there are, that's what I was talking about with the tow truck deployment. If there are vehicles that run out of charge or run out of gas or break down or anything like that, those tow trucks will be able to quickly get them off the road in the event of an emergency. I think that answered the question. I think that was kind of what I was saying. But if there's anything else further that I didn't address, we can also follow up there.
Thanks, Amy. And the next question is kind of a two-part question. I think two questions that can be addressed with one answer that I think Antoinette can go ahead and take. So the questions are, it doesn't appear that additional lanes on 67 are included in this plan. We need 2 lanes each direction between Ramona and Lakeside. And the second question is, where is widening 67 to 4 lanes all the way? It is desperately needed for evacuation, safety, and traffic congestion. It is 30 years overdue. So Antoinette, if you want to go ahead and take that one.
Sure, I'm happy to. There are several planning efforts that are underway that are related to the State Route 67 corridor. And I know this can be a little bit confusing. So at the beginning of the presentation, Rachel explained that we have a regional plan, and this is a plan that looks out 30 years. It's the blueprint for how the region's transportation system will grow and develop. It's required by federal and state law in order to get funding in the region. The majority of the funding that we have for transportation in the region is federal and state dollars. So we have to have a regional plan that complies with federal and state law. One of the laws that we have to comply with is that we cannot have projects in the plan that increase vehicle miles traveled. In fact, we have to demonstrate how that regional plan reduces vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So people are driving less, not more. So there is no widening of the SR 67 or any of the freeways in the regional plan. The CMCPs that we're talking about tonight must be consistent with the regional plan. So there isn't a widening of the lanes proposed in the CMCP either. There is, however, the shoulder widening project, and the areas where the shoulders widened can be used as an evacuation lane. There is another effort that's underway by Caltrans, and this is called the Highway Improvements Project for SR 67. They're doing an environmental analysis, and they are looking at a 4-lane alternative as one of the alternatives that they're evaluating. So there could be an update to the regional plan that included that in the future if the environmental analysis showed that that was the preferred alternative for transportation. So those are the 3 efforts that are underway currently related to SR 67. There is no widening proposed in the regional plan or the CMCP, but is being evaluated in the Highway Improvements Project.
Thank you, Antoinette. All right, our next question is for Erwin. It reads, all the discussion of bike lanes, wildlife crossings, traffic calming, and pedestrian safety improvements are great, but in the last 5 years, per the CHP, there have been 772 MVAs with 439 injuries and 13 fatalities. The solution is not wider shoulders. The solution for safety and evacuation is more lanes. Erwin, do you want to go ahead and take that one?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Dan Summers. So this is Erwin Guanco again. In terms of those numbers, the 772, the 439 injuries and the 13 fatalities from CHP, what we typically do is we pull the numbers from CHP. Those are raw numbers. And yes, we do have collisions that occur on the facility. But when we pull the numbers, we dissect it, we break it down into the different types of accidents. So this raw data is actually analyzed and screened for different types of accidents, and then we address those types of accidents. For instance, if there were run off the road type of accidents, we would address it with rumble strips, potentially installing guardrail. So we have had a lot of safety projects that we addressed using these types of countermeasures. But overall, the trend since it's really been trending down the last 5 years overall in terms of the total accidents, in terms of the fatalities. So hopefully that answers your questions. I mean, I know you mentioned the solution isn't to have wider shoulders, but shoulders actually increases the safety. And I know you also address more lanes, and often more lanes increases the speed, which happens to be a major factor with speeding. There were a lot of impaired drivers. So that would actually increase the speed, and as a result, generally speaking, you would have more collisions that occur on a higher speed facility. So, and the shoulders, they do in fact help out not only with bicyclists, but you're able to put in rumble strips on curves. There are a lot of countermeasures that we can employ, and the shoulders do provide a safe haven for emergency use and for vehicles to pull over. So that does a lot of a number of things, including sight distance. It's just a safer haven for not only emergency vehicles, but also for motorists that are broken down, and then also for bicyclist use. So hopefully I answered your question. Yeah, feel free, please, to chime in if you have anything additional or would like clarification.
Thanks, Erwin. So we are going to need to start wrapping up soon. I think we have room for one more question, and Amy is going to take this one. The question is the existing culvert under SR 67 at Foster Truck Trail included in your study? This culvert was considered to be a crossing for the Trans-County Regional Trail, but as can be used for wildlife crossing.
Sure. So we do not have show the existing culvert under 67 at the Foster Truck Trail currently. So I think this is definitely something we could look into, and this is a great suggestion. We do have the Trans-County Regional Trail connection shown as a multi-use path for currently. And as I discussed earlier, if it's a multi-use path, it cannot double as a wildlife crossing because of the availability to be used by bikes. But I think we will definitely take both of these into account and reevaluate. So thanks for that suggestion.
All right, so that was our last question, and now we're going to pass it over to Melina for conclusion and next steps.
Thank you, Shannon. So next week, we will be presenting at the Lakeside Community Planning Group meeting on March 2nd and the Ramona Community Planning Group meeting on March 3rd. Please encourage your community members to attend these meetings and provide their feedback to us. The draft CMCP will be out for public review in May, and we will be wrapping up with our final document in June of 2022. Next slide. And also just wanted to mention that we will get back to whoever has asked a question that maybe did not get answered or wasn't fully answered. So we will get back to you, and feel free to message us We'll be seeking public input on the San Vicente Corridor even after this meeting. So we encourage you all and your respective communities to visit the San Vicente Corridor Plans Virtual Engagement Hub. We've added the links for the English and Spanish hubs to the chat as well. And on this virtual engagement hub, there are multiple ways to provide feedback for this corridor. You can learn more about the corridor plan and submit comments and feedback on our interactive map. So we're listening, and we hope that you share this information with your neighbors, colleagues, and families to help get the best community representation possible. You can reach us at any time after this webinar with the information on the slide. There's an email address, a phone number, a text number. So feel free to reach out to us. And on behalf of the whole CMCP team, I would like to thank you all for coming and providing your feedback. And we thank you very much and hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.